They told me she couldn't move, that she couldn't speak, that she just stared at the ceiling all day like a shell of who she used to be. Her name is Lila. She's 17. She's my husband's niece. After a car accident last year, the family said she was essentially gone, alive but silent, trapped in a hospital bed, needing round-the-clock care. No one visited much, not even her own parents. They kept her tucked away in a sunless guest room like she was a secret everyone wanted to forget. Last month, my in-laws booked a last-minute trip to Hawaii. They called it a much-needed reset. They left me behind with Lila, told me to keep an eye on her for 10 days. Just make sure she eats. Maybe changes position once in a while, her mother said. It's not hard. She doesn't even know you're there. I didn't ask questions. I felt uneasy, but I didn't push back. But the moment their car pulled out of the driveway, I went back into Lila's room to check on her. She was lying perfectly still, just like always. Her hands folded, her eyes open but empty. I pulled the blanket up to her chest, whispered that I'd be nearby if she needed anything. And then she moved. Slowly, like she was shaking off months of sleep, she sat up in the bed. Not just a twitch or a spasm, she fully sat up. Her eyes locked on mine with terrifying clarity. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't weak or slurred. It was strong, determined. She said, "They want my $6 million. Please help me." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Everything I thought I knew about this family, this girl, that accident, collapsed in that 1 second. And in the silence that followed, I realized something terrifying. They didn't leave me here to care for her. They left me here to keep her quiet. My name is Jamie Preston. I married into the Preston family 5 years ago. My husband Ryan is one of those people who avoids confrontation like it's a contagious disease. He's steady, smart, and kind in that quiet way that makes you think he's really listening, even when he isn't. We live in the guest house behind his parents' estate, tucked just far enough away that it feels like our own space, but close enough that Margot, my mother-in-law, can pop in whenever she pleases. Margot runs the family, not just her household, but the image, the legacy, the money, the expectations. She's elegant, sharp as glass, and terrifying when she wants to be. Daniel, her husband, is a corporate lawyer with a voice like cold metal and a smile that doesn't touch his eyes. They built their world around status, control, and secrecy. I used to think I was just imagining the tension until I realized most people in this family weren't allowed to speak freely. They were just waiting for Margot to finish talking. Ryan and I were trying to save up to buy a place of our own, but with the rising costs and his modest salary, we stayed in the guest house longer than planned. I freelance as an illustrator, mostly children's books and editorial work. Working from home gave me space to breathe. That little guest house became my world. I filled it with warmth, candles, plants, things that felt like me. But no matter how soft I made the inside, I couldn't stop the cold from creeping in through the walls. Lila, Ryan's niece, was rarely mentioned. She used to be all over the house, photos in every hallway, her laughter echoing during summer pool parties. She had bright red hair and a stubborn streak that Margot couldn't stand. But after the car accident last fall, everything changed. They said she suffered a traumatic brain injury. Her body survived, but her mind didn't. According to Margot, she was no longer really there. They kept her in one of the upstairs bedrooms, hired nurses for a while, and then quietly started doing everything themselves. I offered to help once. Just once. I was still naive back then. Margot looked at me like I had insulted her on purpose. "You're not trained for that, Jamie. She's delicate. You don't understand what it's like." So I stopped asking. I assumed they knew what they were doing. I didn't see Lila for almost 6 months after that. The only time I caught a glimpse was during a Christmas dinner when they wheeled her out for 10 minutes. Her face was pale, unmoving, eyes wide open but blank. She didn't blink when I whispered hello. Her hands were curled up in her lap like stiff origami. That was the last time she was in the same room with the family. No one talked about her after that. No updates, no changes, just silence. I learned to keep my questions to myself. That was how you survived in the Preston family. You smiled politely. You offered help that you hoped they wouldn't accept. You praised the wine, complimented the decor, and stayed invisible unless summoned. Ryan was better at it than I was. He had grown up with their rules. He knew how to walk their tightrope and pretend it was a dance. I think he really believed they were doing the best they could. He would say things like, "It's hard for them," or "They're just trying to protect her." But he didn't ask to see her either, not once. My work kept me distracted. I had deadlines, commissions, a small online shop where I sold prints and enamel pins. It was a life I had built around the edges of someone else's empire. I didn't resent it, not completely. I just felt like I was waiting for a sign that we could leave, for Ryan to stand up to them, for something to shift. The day Margot called me into the main house was unusually warm for May. I remember the way her heels clicked against the tile as she led me into the sunroom. She didn't sit down. She stood there, smiling like she had just won something. "Daniel and I are going to Hawaii," she said. 10 days, spa, quiet, just the two of us. I blinked. "That sounds amazing. Who's going to stay with Lila?" Her smile didn't change. "You are." I thought I had misheard her. "Sorry, me?" I asked. "I don't know how to—" "She sleeps most of the time. All her meds are measured out. We'll write you a schedule. It's nothing complicated. Just keep her clean and hydrated. You don't need to do anything medical." I wanted to say no. I wanted to ask why they weren't hiring a nurse or bringing in someone qualified. But Ryan looked at me from across the room with that tired, pleading expression I had seen 100 times. "She trusts you," he said, "more than anyone else." That was a lie. She didn't know me at all. But I nodded. Because what else do you do when a family like this asks you for a favor? So I followed Margot up to the second floor. She opened the door to Lila's room like she was revealing something sacred. The room was dim, quiet, spotless. Lila lay on the bed with her hands folded on top of the blanket, unmoving, her hair braided neatly over one shoulder. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythms. Margot didn't say anything as she closed the door behind me. I stood in the doorway, unsure of what I was even supposed to do. That was the moment before everything began. The calm before the unraveling. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't being left there to help Lila. I was being left there to bury the truth. The morning they left was warm, bright, and deceptively peaceful. I helped Margot and Daniel load their matching monogrammed luggage into the back of their black SUV. Daniel triple-checked the locks on their suitcases, while Margot reminded me to water her orchids and not to let the housekeeper wander upstairs. She handed me a typed schedule folded in half, as if this were a temporary nanny job and not the care of her only daughter. Pill times were marked in bold. Feeding instructions were detailed down to texture, temperature, and timing. I nodded through all of it. I smiled and thanked them. I even waved when they pulled out of the driveway. As soon as the SUV disappeared around the hedge-lined corner, everything went silent. Not the kind of silence you get when the house is finally empty. This was heavier, thick. It settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I walked up to Lila's room with the schedule in my back pocket, more out of obligation than belief that anything I did would matter. I had seen her at her worst, slumped in that chair at Christmas, her lips parted but dry, her eyes dull. If she had any flicker of awareness left, it had been buried months ago. I opened the door slowly. The room smelled sterile, like lavender disinfectant and hospital-grade detergent. It was perfectly staged, like a showroom meant to impress some invisible visitor. A pale blue comforter was pulled up to Lila's chest. Her arms rested at her sides. Her hair was tied neatly back with a ribbon. She looked exactly the way they said she would, still unaware, unreachable. I stepped inside and said her name quietly, more out of politeness than hope. "Lila?" No response. I moved closer and picked up the water bottle on her nightstand, checking to see if it needed refilling. I adjusted the curtain to let in some light and reached for the folded towel Margot had left near the sink. I didn't know if I was supposed to talk to her or just complete the checklist like a machine. I leaned over to adjust her pillow, and then I saw her eyes shift. Not a twitch, a deliberate movement. She looked at me. Focused, sharp, intentional. I froze. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. Maybe the light had caught her cornea. Maybe my own reflection was playing tricks on me. But then she blinked, once, slowly, and her hand moved just enough to disturb the blanket. I stepped back, knocking into the corner of her nightstand. Her lips parted. "I'm not supposed to talk," she said, "but I have to." Her voice was low but steady, not groggy, not weak. It was a voice used to silence, forced into it and now pushing through it because the cost of staying quiet was too high. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stared at her, waiting for her to fall back into stillness, to prove this was some moment of reflex or mental confusion. But she sat up slowly, supporting herself with both arms. She winced slightly, like her muscles hadn't done that in a long time. "They want my money," she said. "My trust fund. They said if I just stay quiet until I'm 18, they'll handle everything." I whispered, "Lila, what are you talking about?" "They made me pretend," she said. "They put stuff in my food, my drinks. It keeps me tired, weak. Just enough to make me stop fighting." Her face was pale but focused, her breath shaky but measured. She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't delusional. She was afraid and determined. Every word cost her something, but she wasn't stopping. "You can't tell them I spoke," she said. "Please." I looked down at her arms. No fours, no feeding tubes, just a small puncture scar near her elbow, a line of bruises that could have been anything, or could have been deliberate. I reached for my phone and hit record. I had no idea what I was capturing, what I was about to walk into, but I needed something. Proof. Witness. She looked at the phone and shook her head, just once. "They'll know. They'll see it." I turned it off. My hands were shaking. I could barely hold it. "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell me?" "Because you're the first one who's looked at me in months. You don't know what they've said about you, but I know you're not like them. And they left you here. That's a mistake." She closed her eyes, took a breath, and then added one final thing. "I don't want the money. I just want to live. But if they think I'll take it back from them, they'll make sure I never wake up again." She leaned back onto the bed, her body trembling with the effort. Within seconds, she looked exactly as she had before, limp, silent, erased. The same girl they had warned me not to bother talking to, but I had heard her. I had seen her, and nothing in that house would ever look the same again. I stood outside Lila's room for a long time after she went quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I kept running her words over and over in my head, trying to find the part where it didn't make sense. But it all did. Too much of it did. I wasn't imagining it. She moved, she spoke, she looked straight at me. Her words weren't jumbled or confused. They were clear, urgent, and terrifying. I went back downstairs and stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the schedule Margot had given me. I stared at it like it would explain what had just happened. Breakfast at 8, medication at 10, turn her body every 3 hours, check for sores, make sure she drinks at least 16 ounces of fluid a day, smile and be patient. That was the last line. Handwritten in the corner, smile and be patient. It wasn't a care schedule. It was a script, a way to keep her in character. I picked up my phone and debated whether to call Ryan. I needed to tell someone. I needed to say it out loud, but I couldn't shake what Lila said. If they find out, they'll make sure I never wake up again. She was afraid of them, her own parents. That kind of fear doesn't come out of nowhere. It builds, it settles, it lives inside you until you forget what normal even feels like. I didn't call him. Instead, I went back up to her room around lunch and found her in the same position. Blank eyes, still body, shallow breathing. I whispered her name again, no response. "Lila, it's me, Jamie." Nothing. I touched her hand. It was warm, not limp, not lifeless, just still. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You don't have to answer, I need to know I'm not losing my mind." No change. I sat down beside her and stayed for 15 minutes. I read aloud from the schedule, then switched to a magazine I found in her nightstand. Nothing happened. By the time I got downstairs, I had convinced myself that I had misinterpreted something. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe I fell asleep at the foot of the bed and imagined her voice. People see things under stress. I had read about that. It was the logical explanation, but logic kept colliding with memory, her eyes, her voice, the exact way she said my name. I poured myself a glass of water and opened my laptop to search for anything about her trust fund. I remembered hearing something once, a conversation at a family dinner I hadn't been part of, just overhearing through the kitchen wall. Daniel had said, "She'll never make it to 18. We should prepare for that." I had assumed it was about grief. Now I wasn't so sure. I searched her name and her school and came across an old article about the accident. It was short. She had been driving alone on a winding road just outside town. No drugs or alcohol involved, just loss of control. The car had flipped. She'd been airlifted out. The only passenger. There was no mention of who she had been with before the crash. No mention of her parents. That night, I went to check on her again. Same scene, same body, same silence. But this time, when I reached for her water bottle, I noticed the lid was loose. I had tightened it that morning. It was one of those thermos-style bottles with a twist cap that clicks. She hadn't drunk anything, but it had been opened. She'd opened it herself. I felt that same cold crawl through my chest again, that quiet panic that tells you everything is wrong, but you can't prove it yet. I sat down on the floor outside her door. I stared at the hallway wall for what felt like an hour. I was scared, not just of what might happen to her, but of what I might uncover. If she was telling the truth, then Margot and Daniel weren't just distant parents. They were monsters in tailored clothes. And if I told anyone what I saw, what would happen? Who would believe me? I was the daughter-in-law who barely belonged, the freelancer with no degree in medicine or law. They had money, power, and influence. I had a folding schedule and a gut feeling. I heard a door creak upstairs. I stood quickly, half expecting Lila to appear, but everything was still. I turned off the hallway lights and went back down to the guest house, where I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time. Every sound made me jolt awake. Every shadow looked like it was hiding something. The next morning, I found a note slipped under the door of the guest house, written in pencil, block letters, shaky but legible. "Don't tell them. I'll try again tonight." There was no signature, no explanation, but I didn't need one. She was awake. She was thinking, and she was still trapped in that room pretending to be someone else. And now I was part of her secret. By the third day, I stopped pretending I was here to follow instructions. I still gave Lila her meals and made sure her room was clean and quiet, but I no longer moved through the house like a background character in someone else's life. Something was wrong, and I couldn't act like I didn't see it. Lila hadn't spoken again since that first moment. She kept up the act so perfectly it scared me. But every now and then, when I leaned over her bed or adjusted her pillow, her eyes would flick toward mine, focused and aware. She was in there, waiting, calculating. I didn't push her. I didn't ask questions. I waited. On the fourth morning, I found another note, this time inside the medicine cabinet in her bathroom. It was taped to the back of a bottle of mouthwash, same handwriting, same pencil, 4 words, "Call Aunt Jenna, alone." I had heard Jenna's name only once since I married into the family. Ryan mentioned her casually during a holiday dinner. She was Daniel's younger sister, estranged from the family after some kind of falling out. Margot said she was unstable. Ryan said she was difficult. I remembered asking why no one talked to her anymore. Margot waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. She was too emotional after the accident, she said, tried to cause trouble, the kind who thrives on chaos. But now I had a teenager hiding notes in mouthwash bottles, asking me to call the one woman the family had erased. I waited until I was in my car, parked 3 blocks away outside a coffee shop before I made the call. I used the house landline to check the last few received calls, and there it was, J. Torres. I typed the number into my phone and held my breath as it rang. "Hello?" The voice was cautious, adult, female. "Hi," I said. "Is this Jenna Torres?" "Who's this?" "My name is Jamie. I'm married to Ryan Preston. I'm staying with Lila right now." There was a pause. Not dead air, just tension. "I haven't heard her name in over a year," she said. "Why are you calling me now?" "She asked me to," I said. "She wrote me a note. She's talking again. She's aware." Jenna inhaled sharply. I could hear it like she had just been punched in the chest. "She's okay?" Her voice cracked. "She's not okay," I said. "But she's alive in there. She's pretending. I think they made her. She told me something about money, about them trying to keep her silent until she turns 18. Silence again. But this time it was different. Not uncertainty. Carefully measured restraint. "They told me I was being dramatic," Jenna finally said. That grief was making me see things. I came to visit her 2 weeks after the crash. I kissed her hand, and she squeezed mine. I swear to God. I told Daniel, and he laughed. Said it was probably a muscle spasm. So what happened? I asked. Why did you stop coming? Margot told me not to come back, that I was interfering with Lila's recovery. Then Daniel sent me a cease and desist letter. Said if I came onto their property again, they'd press charges. It was all so quiet, so careful. I tried to fight it. I talked to lawyers. But everything disappeared. No one wanted to go up against them. Did Lila have money? I asked. A trust or something? Jenna didn't hesitate. She had $6 million from her mother, my brother's first wife. Lila was supposed to get access to the fund in stages starting at 18. But if she's declared permanently incapacitated, Daniel becomes her legal conservator. That was it. That was the piece I had been circling around. I didn't know if Daniel had been planning it from the beginning or if the crash had simply created an opportunity. But now I had more than suspicion. She said they were drugging her, I said quietly, that they're keeping her weak on purpose. I believe it, Jenna said. I always did, and you're the first person to say it out loud since this started. I looked around the parking lot. My hands were shaking again. I felt like someone could be watching me even though I knew that was paranoia. Or maybe it wasn't. Can I call you again? I asked. I don't know what to do. I'm not a lawyer, she said, but I know people. Good people. If she's lucid, if you can get any kind of evidence, I'll help you. But you need to be careful. You're the first person they've let near her in months. That means they trust you or they're using you. Either way, if they find out what you know, they won't hesitate to protect themselves. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car with the keys in my lap, staring straight ahead, waiting for my breathing to slow down. Lila hadn't imagined it, and I hadn't either. They isolated her for a reason. They cut out anyone who cared. They surrounded her with silence and routine and control. And now she had reached out to me. The question was, how long could I protect her before they realized I wasn't playing along? After the call with Jenna, everything around me started to look different. The house felt colder. The silence felt more rehearsed. Even the way Lila's medications were labeled seemed overly precise, like someone had spent too much time making sure every bottle looked official and unquestionable. I couldn't sit in that house for another day just following Margot's schedule. I needed something real, something I could hold in my hands. Otherwise, I was just another woman with a wild story no one would believe. Margot's office was on the main floor behind a pair of glass-paneled doors she usually kept locked. But the morning after my conversation with Jenna, I noticed she had forgotten to relock them before she left. The cleaning staff had already come and gone. The house was quiet. Lila was fed, resting, and safe in her room. I told myself I was only going to look for 10 minutes. Inside, the office looked exactly as I expected. Neat, expensive, impersonal. Her desk was spotless, her bookshelf color-coded, and a framed certificate from a charity gala hung beside a print of a Monet garden scene. Every inch of the room was curated for appearances, but the desk drawers were locked. All of them. I checked behind the printer, under the chair, even inside the flower vase for a key. Nothing. I almost gave up until I noticed one of the lower cabinet doors under the window sat slightly crooked on its hinge. I knelt down, reached inside, and found an old tin recipe box shoved behind a stack of books. Inside the box were 2 spare house keys and a small silver skeleton key. I tried it on the bottom right drawer. It clicked. Inside was a slim leather folder labeled Medical Documents, LP. I opened it, bracing myself. The first thing I saw was a power of attorney document signed 6 months after Lila's accident, giving full legal authority to Daniel Preston. It wasn't just a general consent form. This document authorized him to make permanent medical, financial, and residential decisions on her behalf. At the bottom was a scrawled signature that didn't look like a teenager's. It barely looked human. Next was a notarized psychological assessment, also dated after the accident, stating Lila was cognitively unfit to make legal or financial decisions and would remain so indefinitely. No therapist name, no hospital letterhead, just a signature from someone listed as consultant. Then came the check. It was torn in half, but I lined up the pieces and read the name in the pay to the order of line, Jenna Torres. The amount was $250,000. Memo. For silence. I stared at it for a full minute, not even breathing. It was dated just 4 months after the accident, and it had never been cached. I took out my phone and snapped photos of everything, front and back, document edges, signatures. I wasn't going to take anything, but I needed a record. If they caught me, I wanted at least one thing I could send someone before they made it all disappear. I returned everything the way I found it, locked the drawer, and wiped down the key. I put it back in the recipe box, shoved it behind the books, closed the cabinet, and checked the office door for fingerprints before stepping out. My hands were shaking again. My stomach turned in knots. But I had it now. I had proof that Daniel was acting as Lila's guardian without a court ruling, that he had declared her incompetent through shady paperwork, that he had tried to pay off Jenna to keep quiet. I had no medical training, no law degree, but even I could see this wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. When I returned to Lila's room, she was lying there as usual, still and blank. I sat down beside her and whispered, "I found it. I know what they did." She blinked once. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side. "You were right," I said, "and I'm going to help you, but we have to be smart." She didn't speak, but her breathing changed, slower, steadier, like something inside her had finally relaxed. I had spent weeks trying not to rock the boat in a family that lived on appearances. Now I was planning to capsize it. There was no way back from this. That night I barely slept. Every noise in the house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the ticking of the hallway clock, even the hum of the refrigerator made me tense. I kept the documents hidden on an encrypted drive and backed them up to a secure cloud, but even that didn't make me feel safe. I had the truth, but it wasn't just dangerous. It was fragile. The next morning, I woke up early to check on Lila. She was exactly where I had left her, lying still, eyes open. Her hands were resting on her blanket, but her right pinky tapped against her thigh once as I approached. A tiny sign, just for me. I nodded. I understood. By midday, Margot called. Her voice was bright and rehearsed, like a local morning news anchor. "Just checking in. How's everything going with our sleeping beauty?" "She's stable," I said. "No changes." Margot let out a soft, satisfied sigh. "Good. That's what we want. Routine is key. Keep things quiet." I paused, then asked, "Has she had any recent medical reviews? Any specialists check her status in the last few months?" The silence on the other end wasn't long, but it was cold. "We've had private physicians monitor her. You know that. Why are you asking?" "Just wondering," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "She seems, alert sometimes." Margot's voice snapped tighter. "You're not a doctor, Jamie. Be careful about making assumptions. You're doing a kind thing. Don't complicate it." She hung up before I could say anything else. Less than 2 hours later, someone rang the doorbell at the guest house. It was Robert, their longtime estate manager. He was holding a manila envelope. "From Mrs. Preston," he said. "She asked me to deliver it personally." I opened it after he left. Inside was a new schedule, revised, more medications, a detailed sleep routine, a log sheet for food and fluid intake. There were notes in red ink, no unsupervised visitors, no media, no digital recording inside the house. At the bottom, "Please remember, Jamie, we trust you. Let's keep this simple." They were tightening the noose. That afternoon, I tried to tell Ryan everything. I waited until he got home from work, sat him down, and told him what I had seen, what I had heard, and what I had found. I even showed him the photos of the documents. He scrolled through them slowly, shaking his head. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "This doesn't prove anything illegal. Ryan, they forged her signature. They isolated her. They paid Jenna to go away. You're not a lawyer. You're jumping to conclusions, and honestly, you've been acting paranoid." "Paranoid?" I repeated. "She spoke to me, Ryan. She sat up. She's aware. They're keeping her weak on purpose." He stood and paced across the room. "My parents have issues, sure. They're strict, controlling, I know that. But drugging their daughter? That's a serious accusation. You could destroy this family with that kind of claim." "I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I'm trying to protect her." He looked at me with tired eyes. "Jamie, you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you're seeing something that isn't there." That was when I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Ryan wasn't going to help me, not because he didn't care, but because caring would mean admitting his parents were capable of something unspeakable. That would unravel everything he believed about the people who raised him, and Ryan wasn't built for that kind of chaos. I spent the rest of the day in silence, except for checking on Lila. She hadn't left another note. She hadn't spoken again, but I knew she was waiting, watching, listening. The housekeeper, Anita, came the next morning. She barely made eye contact. She usually hummed while she worked, but not this time. When I offered her coffee, she declined with a stiff shake of her head. I noticed she skipped Lila's room entirely. The message was clear. No one wanted to be seen helping me. By the end of the week, I felt like a ghost in someone else's life. Everyone acted polite but distant. The staff no longer asked how I was. Ryan kept coming home later and later. When I tried to tell him about the note in the medicine cabinet, he told me I was spiraling. "I think you should talk to someone," he said, professionally. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I am talking to someone. You, but you're not listening." He didn't answer. That night, I opened the guest house window and cried quietly into a towel. Not because I was breaking, but because I knew I couldn't trust anyone around me anymore. They weren't just ignoring the truth. They were rewriting it. And I was completely alone. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had made up my mind. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while Lila lay in that bed, pretending to be someone she wasn't, waiting for the wrong people to come back and decide her fate. I had tried to tell the truth. I had tried to warn the people closest to me. They didn't want to see it. That left one option. I had to get Lila out. It wasn't a decision I made easily. I went back and forth in my mind, weighing the risks, imagining worst-case scenarios. But every time I looked at her, trapped in a routine designed to erase her, I knew staying quiet was more dangerous than leaving. I waited until Ryan left for a weekend client retreat. I knew he wouldn't ask questions. I didn't tell him where I was going, and I didn't take any calls after he left. That gave me a small window. At dawn, I packed a bag with essentials. I included the schedule Margot had written, the revised version, and the photos I had taken of the forged documents. I loaded everything onto a USB drive and backed it up twice. I texted Jenna with one word, "Ready." She responded in under 5 minutes with an address. "Bring her here. I'll have a doctor waiting." The plan wasn't perfect. I had no legal authority. I wasn't her guardian, her parent, or a medical professional, but I had her trust. That was enough. I wheeled the chair into Lila's room, slowly and quietly. I looked into her eyes as I knelt beside her. "Do you want to leave?" I asked. "Right now, with me. I have a safe place." She didn't speak, but she blinked once, then shifted her eyes toward the door. That was enough. I dressed her in a sweatshirt and soft leggings. I wrapped a scarf loosely around her head and shoulders. From a distance, she looked like any tired teenager being pushed out for fresh air. I covered her legs with a blanket and slid her small backpack under the chair. The whole time, I kept thinking someone would stop me, that a staff member would walk in, or Margot would call, or a neighbor would ask questions. But no one did. No one noticed. I backed my car out of the garage and wheeled her across the driveway, straight into the back seat. I locked the doors, fastened her belt, and didn't say a word until we were on the highway. "You're safe," I told her. "No more acting. Just rest. We're almost there." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her body loosened in the seat, her head leaning slightly against the window like she was allowing herself to exhale for the first time in months. We pulled up to Jenna's house an hour later. It was a modest one-story home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing about it screamed drama or scandal. It looked exactly like the kind of place a teenager should have been recovering in. Jenna opened the door before I could knock. She hugged me tight, then led us inside to a small room where a gray-haired woman in scrubs waited. Her name was Dr. Malin. She greeted Lila gently, spoke to her as if she had known her for years, and began a basic exam with a calm, practiced touch. It didn't take long. "She's alert," Dr. Malin said. "Her motor control is limited, but functional. Her speech is intact, and she's heavily sedated, not just once or twice. This is long-term pharmacological suppression." Jenna's face tightened. I saw fury behind her calm eyes. but she kept it together for Lila's sake. I handed her the USB drive with the documents and photographs. "This is everything I could get," I said. "It proves they've been making decisions for her under forged authority, and there's a torn check to you. They tried to buy your silence." Jenna nodded slowly. "I know someone who can help us take this to court, but we'll need to file for emergency guardianship. If Daniel and Margot find out she's gone before we have legal backing, they'll come here, and they won't come quietly." "I'll do whatever you need," I said. "You've already done enough," Jenna said. "You believed her." I sat on the edge of the bed while Lila sipped water, slow and careful. She looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." That was the first time I had seen her smile, and in that moment I knew there was no turning back. I had pulled the first thread. The whole thing was about to unravel. 3 days later, Jenna filed for emergency guardianship of Lila with her attorney, a former juvenile rights advocate named Alyssa Grant. Alyssa moved fast. She knew exactly what forms to file, which judges were most likely to hear the petition, and how to present our evidence in a way that forced the court to listen. Lila underwent a formal medical evaluation at a private clinic the same afternoon. The doctors documented everything: her alertness, her speech, her motor skills, and most importantly, the high concentration of sedatives in her bloodstream. She answered every question clearly. She spelled her name, recited her address, named the president, and explained the color of the walls in the room. She wasn't just lucid. She was angry, scared, and determined to speak for herself. The evidence we submitted was damning: the photos of the forged power of attorney, the unlicensed medical assessment, the check to Jenna, and finally a sworn statement from Lila, dictated word for word and signed in front of 2 witnesses. It was short but powerful. "I have been conscious and aware since December. I have not given consent for my parents to make medical or financial decisions for me. I have been given medication I did not agree to. I do not trust Daniel or Margot Preston with my care. I want to live with my aunt, Jenna Torres." It was enough for the judge to issue a temporary restraining order against Margot and Daniel. They were not allowed to contact or approach Lila until the hearing, but it was too late to stay invisible. That same night, just before sunset, a black SUV pulled into Jenna's driveway. It was the same one Daniel had driven to the airport. The tires crunched across the gravel like the opening line of a threat. He stepped out first, crisp suit, expensive shoes, and a look in his eyes that was colder than I had ever seen. Margot followed, flawless as always, her mouth pressed in a tight line. Jenna met them at the front door, arms crossed. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "There's a restraining order." Daniel held up a folded piece of paper. "We just want to talk." As a family, I stepped into view behind Jenna. "She doesn't want to talk to you," I said. Margot tilted her head. "Jamie, you need to be very careful. You don't know what you're getting into." "I know exactly what I'm in," I said. "I've been living in it for years." Daniel stepped forward. "You kidnapped our daughter." "You drugged your daughter," I said, "and I have proof." Jenna didn't move. She stood like a wall between them and the door. Then, behind us, a soft voice broke through the tension. "She remembers everything." Lila stood at the hallway entrance, gripping the wall for balance. Her legs were shaky but solid. Her face was pale, but she looked them both in the eyes without blinking. "I remember the accident," she said. "I remember the fight before it. You were screaming about the trust fund. You said I wasn't ready, that I was reckless." Margot's face twisted. "You were in shock. You don't know what you saw." Lila shook her head. "You left me in the car. I couldn't move. You left me there and walked away. You said it would be better this way, that people would understand if I didn't make it." I could feel the air being pulled from the room. Daniel stepped forward like he could still regain control. "You're confused," he said. "You're recovering. We were protecting you." "No," she said. "You were protecting the money." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I pretended to be asleep for months because I was afraid, but I'm not afraid anymore." Daniel took another step. "If you think this little show is going to take away everything we've built—" Jenna raised her phone. "The entire conversation has been recorded. You should leave before you dig your hole any deeper." Daniel's face changed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He turned calmly and walked back to the SUV. Margot stared for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, then followed. No one said a word as they drove away. Inside the house, Lila sat down slowly on the couch, her breathing heavy. "I didn't think I could do it," she whispered. "You already did," I said. "You saved yourself." She looked at Jenna, then at me. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "For the first time in a year," she said, "I feel like a person again." The truth was out. Spoken, heard, recorded, and finally it couldn't be ignored. After Daniel and Margot drove away, everything went still. Not peaceful, not quiet, just suspended, like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. No one in the house spoke for a long time. Lila sat with her knees pulled close, clutching a pillow like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Jenna stood in the kitchen, making tea she never drank. I stayed near the window, watching the road, half expecting the SUV to return with police or lawyers or worse. But it didn't. By morning, everything had changed. Lila's hearing was scheduled for the following week. Jenna's attorney made sure she had full protection until then. A social worker was assigned to check on her condition, and when the woman arrived, Lila surprised all of us by sitting upright, answering questions directly and even asking for a glass of water without hesitation. "I want to tell the judge everything," she said. "They don't deserve to control me." The strength in her voice scared me and inspired me at the same time. I saw a girl slowly returning to herself, and not just any self, a stronger one, a version of her that had survived something most people would never understand. But not everyone was handling it the same way. Ryan called 2 days later. I didn't answer the first time. I let it go to voicemail. On the second call, I picked up. "Where are you?" he asked. His voice was flat, tired, like he had spent the last 48 hours being fed a different version of the story. "I'm with Lila," I said. "She's safe. We're staying at Jenna's until the hearing." He didn't say anything for a few seconds. "They told me you manipulated her, that you're working with Jenna to get back at the family. Is that what you believe?" He sighed. "I don't know what to believe." I waited. "I just know my mom is panicking. My dad's furious. They're talking about pressing charges." "For what?" I asked. "Helping a girl escape a fake medical prison? Showing the court documents they forged? You don't understand what you've done." I let that hang for a second, then answered, "No. I understand exactly what I've done. What I don't understand is how you're still unsure." He hung up without another word. That night, Jenna turned on the local news. We didn't expect to see anything, but there it was, Lila's story, or at least a version of it. A short segment about a legal dispute involving the guardianship of a minor with inherited wealth. No names, no footage, just vague language meant to stir interest without inviting lawsuits. But the fact that it had made the news meant one thing. This wasn't private anymore. The next day, Margot's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to Jenna. It claimed Jenna was defaming the Prestons, inciting medical fraud, and interfering with private family matters. It also demanded that Lila be returned to the care of her legal guardians immediately. Jenna didn't flinch. She handed the letter to her lawyer, who responded with a counter-threat. An official motion accusing Daniel and Margot of long-term coercion, medical abuse, and forgery. The gloves were off. Lila didn't seem afraid, not anymore, but there was a weight to her silence. Every time she glanced toward a window or startled at a knock on the door, I could see the trauma that hadn't left her yet. Healing would take time. We kept the days structured. Jenna cooked. I helped Lila stretch and walk small distances. We listened to music in the afternoons, just quiet background stuff. Sometimes Lila would hum along. That simple sound, a 17-year-old girl humming again, felt more powerful than any legal document we had collected. One evening, while we sat on the porch, she asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Do you think they ever loved me?" I didn't lie. I didn't try to soften it. "I think they loved their version of you, the version they could control." She nodded. That seemed to be enough. Later that night, I sat alone in the guest room and went through my messages. Most were silent. A few from friends who had heard rumors, asking if I was okay. But one stuck out. It was from Ryan. "I didn't protect her. I didn't protect you. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this." I stared at it for a long time, then turned off my phone. This wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. The fallout wasn't just legal or emotional, it was personal. It was the collapse of a lie so big it had swallowed everyone in its path. And now, in the ruins, Lila was starting to build something new, something honest. And I was going to stand beside her while she did. The court hearing lasted less than 2 hours. Lila sat in a wheelchair next to Jenna at the front of the room. She wore a simple navy dress, and her hair was tied back in a low braid. She looked young but focused, not fragile, not broken. When the judge asked if she understood the proceedings, Lila spoke clearly into the microphone. "Yes, I want my aunt to be my guardian." The room was silent as the judge reviewed the evidence. Medical reports, sworn statements, audio recordings, legal documents, the toxicology results, the torn check. Everything we had gathered was presented in a clean, methodical order. Not dramatic, just true. Daniel and Margot were there. They didn't speak. Their attorney tried to challenge the credibility of the evidence, but the judge cut him off halfway through his second objection. Lila was no longer the passive teenager they could frame as incompetent. She was awake, alert, and full of memory. The judge ruled in her favor on every point. Jenna was granted immediate full guardianship. All financial access and medical authority previously held by Daniel or Margot was revoked. A criminal investigation into the documents and Lila's treatment was opened before we even left the courthouse. Outside, reporters waited. Jenna guided Lila past them without a word. I followed quietly behind. The cameras clicked, but no one said anything. It wasn't a scene. It was a release. Back at Jenna's house, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle. Not celebration, but relief. Like the ceiling had been lowered for months and someone finally raised it back to full height. Lila's days began to change. She met with a physical therapist 3 times a week and a trauma counselor twice. Her appetite returned. Her posture improved. She laughed at bad television and rolled her eyes at Jenna's strict meal plans. One morning, I found her in the kitchen making her own toast. "I wanted to do it myself," she said, holding the knife like a sword as she spread the butter. "You always could," I said. "You just weren't allowed to." We smiled at each other, and I saw the edge of her new strength shining through. Not forced, not fake, earned. As she grew stronger, I started giving her more space. I moved into a short-term rental down the street. Jenna insisted I didn't have to, but I knew it was time. This was her space now. She had people looking out for her. She didn't need a protector. She needed a life. Ryan reached out a few more times. His texts shifted from denial to apology to silence. Eventually, I answered him with a message of my own. "You knew something was wrong. You didn't want to know how wrong. I don't blame you for breaking. I just can't go back to pretending." He didn't reply. I started painting again. Nothing for clients, just for myself. I filled an entire sketchbook with illustrations of girls standing in locked rooms and walking out barefoot. I painted open doors, cracked windows, fists wrapped in ribbon, and eyes staring through chain-link fences. I didn't plan any of it. It just came out of me, one page after another. Jenna framed one of them and hung it in Lila's room. It was a small piece, simple lines in watercolor, a girl standing under a tree, her shadow shaped like a wolf. "She likes this one," Jenna told me. "Says it reminds her she's not weak just because she survived." A few weeks later, Lila asked if she could visit the ocean, just for a day, somewhere quiet. We drove to a small beach 2 hours south, packed sandwiches, and brought a foldable chair. She stood in the sand with my help, her feet sinking slowly into the wet shoreline. She stared at the water for a long time before speaking. "I used to think that surviving was just waiting for things to be over, but I don't want to wait anymore." "You don't have to," I said. She nodded. "I want to do something with my story. I want to talk about it, help other girls, write it, film it. I don't know what yet, but it can't stay inside me." "You'll know what to do when it's time," I said. We didn't talk much the rest of the day. We didn't have to. I saw her strength in the way she stood in the wind, in how she picked up shells without rushing, in how she finally looked at the horizon like it belonged to her again. That was the recovery. Not the courtroom ruling, not the physical therapy. It was this, her taking her life back one piece at a time on her own terms. People talk about evil like it's loud, like it announces itself with raised voices and slammed doors. But what I've learned is that real cruelty is often quiet. It wears tailored clothes, it smiles in public, it keeps its voice low and its house spotless. It convinces everyone, even the people suffering, that nothing is wrong. That's what happened to Lila. And for a while, I was part of it. Not by hurting her, not by agreeing with them, but by not asking enough questions, by assuming they knew best, by believing silence meant peace. Silence is not always peaceful. Sometimes it's forced, sometimes it's weaponized, and sometimes it's the only thing left to a person who has had everything else taken from them. The day Lila looked at me and spoke was the day I stopped being a bystander. It didn't feel brave, it felt terrifying. But in that moment, I decided that being afraid of the truth was no longer an excuse. She could have stayed quiet. She could have kept pretending. It would have been safer. But she risked everything for a chance at freedom. And that taught me something. The truth will not protect you from consequences, but it will clear the path. It will break the grip of people who survive on secrecy. It will open doors that were sealed shut by power, fear, and shame. If you are watching this and something inside you feels trapped, if you've been told to stay quiet, to play along, to not ask questions, remember Lila. She didn't need to scream. She just needed someone to listen. You don't have to change the whole world. You just have to refuse to accept a version of it built on lies. That's where everything begins. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about what silence really means, please like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. Tell me what you felt, what you've seen, what you've survived. And if you want more true stories that peel back the layers people hide behind, subscribe to the channel. There are more voices like Lila's, voices that were almost lost. Let's make sure they're heard.